We live in a world where change is the only constant. From the moment we are born, we begin a journey through time, where everything around us is in a state of flux. The seasons shift, our bodies age, emotions rise and fall, and circumstances evolve beyond our control. Yet, despite the undeniable impermanence of life, we struggle to hold on to things, people, and experiences, fearing their inevitable departure. The illusion of permanence is one of the greatest sources of human suffering. We build our identities upon transient elements, our careers, relationships, possessions, believing that they define who we are. But when these things slip away, as they inevitably do, we feel lost, as if a part of ourselves has vanished with them. The truth is, nothing in this world is meant to last forever, and clinging to the illusion of permanence only deepens our suffering. What if, instead of resisting change, we embraced it? What if we viewed impermanence not as a source of sorrow, but as an invitation to fully engage with the present moment? When we acknowledge that everything is fleeting, we begin to appreciate life in a deeper, more profound way. We savor our experiences rather than take them for granted, and we let go of attachments that no longer serve us. To flow with impermanence means to cultivate a mindset of acceptance rather than resistance. Life is not a rigid structure but a dynamic dance of change. When we stop expecting things to remain as they are, we no longer suffer when they transform. Instead, we learn to appreciate the beauty of each passing moment, knowing that its value lies in its temporality. Just as the autumn leaves fall to make way for new spring growth, everything in life follows a cycle. Relationships, emotions, and circumstances are not meant to be static. By aligning ourselves with this truth, we cultivate inner peace and flexibility. We cease grasping onto experiences, instead allowing them to arise and dissolve naturally. Moreover, embracing impermanence brings a profound sense of gratitude. When we acknowledge that nothing lasts forever, we begin to cherish the present with more sincerity. Every conversation, every act of kindness, and every moment of joy becomes a precious gift. Rather than fearing loss, we celebrate the fleeting beauty of existence. To truly embrace impermanence, we must also learn to relinquish control. Much of our suffering comes from our attempts to dictate how life unfolds. But when we surrender to the natural rhythm of change, we find liberation. Like a river flowing effortlessly toward the ocean, we move through life with grace, unburdened by resistance. Thus, flowing with impermanence is not about passivity, it is about engaging with life fully, free from the chains of expectation. It is about recognizing that change is not an enemy but a teacher, guiding us toward deeper wisdom, resilience, and freedom. Imagine standing by a river. The water continuously flows, never stopping, never remaining the same. Each drop of water that passes will never return, yet the river itself remains. Our lives are much like this river, ever changing, yet maintaining a certain continuity. The river symbolizes time itself. The past, like water that has flowed downstream, is beyond our grasp. The future, like the water upstream, is yet to come. But the present, the water directly in front of us, is the only reality we can experience. Still, we often find ourselves lamenting over past regrets or anxiously awaiting the future, forgetting that life is unfolding right before our eyes. Trying to hold on to a single moment is like trying to scoop up a handful of river water and expect it to stay the same. No matter how tightly we grasp, it will slip through our fingers. This is the essence of impermanence. Nothing remains fixed, and the more we attempt to cling to things, the more suffering we create for ourselves. Yet, despite its ever-changing nature, the river is not chaotic. It follows a natural course, moving effortlessly toward the ocean. Likewise, when we learn to accept the flow of time rather than resist it, We begin to move through life with a sense of peace and ease. We stop clinging to the past, fearing the future, or trying to control the uncontrollable. Instead, we immerse ourselves in the present, flowing with life rather than against it. This perspective shift allows us to see change not as something to be feared but as an inevitable and necessary part of existence. Just as the river shapes the landscape, carving new paths and nourishing life along its banks, impermanence shapes us, allowing for growth, renewal, and transformation. Thus, to live fully is to flow with the river of time, to embrace each moment as it comes, let go of what has passed, and trust in the journey ahead. In doing so, we find a freedom that is not dependent on external circumstances but arises from a deep understanding of life's impermanence. A Zen master once held up a porcelain cup and told his students, "To me, this cup is already broken. I use it, I drink from it, and I enjoy it. But I know that one day, it will fall, shatter, and be no more. Knowing this, I appreciate it all the more." The parable of the broken cup teaches us that impermanence is not something to be feared but something to be understood and embraced. When we recognize that everything we cherish is already subject to change, we learn to love and appreciate it more deeply in the present. Just like the cup, our relationships, experiences, and possessions are all temporary, and by acknowledging this, we liberate ourselves from the suffering caused by attachment. The wisdom in this teaching extends beyond material objects. Our own lives are like the cup, delicate, transient, and ultimately bound to break. Rather than living in denial of this truth, we can choose to engage fully with life, savoring each moment while it lasts. This does not mean we should not care for the things or people we love, but rather that we should love with an open hand, not a clenched fist. Letting go does not mean indifference, it means presence. It means fully appreciating the beauty of life, understanding that nothing can be held onto forever. And in that realization, we find peace, acceptance, and a profound sense of gratitude for the fleeting yet precious nature of existence. The Buddhist concept of Anatta, or non-self, is not merely a denial of identity but a profound realization that the self is nothing more than a temporary aggregation of elements. We do not possess absolute control over our bodies or minds. If we were truly the masters of ourselves, why can't we stop our hearts from beating? Why can't we silence intrusive thoughts? One of the deepest misconceptions we carry is the belief in a solid, unchanging self. From childhood, we are conditioned to see ourselves as separate, unique entities with fixed identities. We say, "This is me, this is my personality, these are my thoughts and emotions." But who, or what, is this me that we so fervently defend and cling to? If we examine ourselves closely, we realize that what we call the self is not a singular, static thing but a collection of ever-changing processes. Our bodies are constantly renewing, cells die and regenerate, our physical form ages, and the appearance we had 10 years ago is not the same as today. Likewise, our emotions shift. What angers us one day may become trivial the next. Our thoughts are fleeting, appearing and disappearing like clouds in the sky. If all these aspects of our existence are in a state of flux, where is the fixed, independent self that we believe in? Buddhist philosophy explains the self as a composition of 5 aggregates, skandhas. Form, rupa, our physical body, subject to birth, growth, decay, and death. Sensation, vedana, our experiences of pleasure, pain, or neutrality, which arise and fade with each moment. Perception, sama, how we recognize and interpret the world based on past experiences. Mental formations, sakra, our habits, intentions, and thought patterns, all of which are conditioned by previous causes. Consciousness, vaya, our awareness, which fluctuates moment by moment, dependent on sensory input. none of these aggregates remain unchanged. They arise and dissolve continuously, yet we mistakenly identify with them as me or mine. The self is not a fixed entity but a temporary convergence of these 5 elements. Just as a river is not a single, static thing but a continuous flow of water, our existence is a process, not a permanent being. Despite the transient nature of the self, we construct identities around it. We cling to labels, our name, profession, nationality, and relationships, as if they define our true essence. When someone praises us, we feel validated. When criticized, we feel attacked, as if our very existence is at stake. This is the ego's illusion, the desperate attempt to maintain a false sense of permanence in a world that is inherently impermanent. This attachment to self breeds suffering. When we believe we are a fixed entity, we fear change because it threatens our sense of identity. We experience anxiety over aging, disappointment when we fail to meet expectations, and pain when we lose things we thought defined us. But these struggles stem from a misunderstanding. There is no permanent I to protect, only a flow of experiences to observe and embrace. When we begin to see through the illusion of self, we loosen the grip of ego and attachment. Instead of resisting change, we flow with it. We stop defining ourselves by our past mistakes or future ambitions, realizing that each moment offers a new beginning. Without the weight of an artificial self to defend, we experience life with greater ease and lightness. Imagine living without the constant burden of self-concern, no need to prove yourself, no fear of losing face, no pressure to meet rigid expectations. This is the freedom that arises when we transcend the illusion of self. We become more adaptable, open, and compassionate, recognizing that just as we are fluid and ever-changing, so is everyone else. To realize non-self is not to deny our existence but to see it clearly. We continue to function in the world, but without attachment to an illusory I. This shift in understanding does not make us passive or detached, rather, it allows us to engage with life more fully, without fear or resistance. By seeing the self as a transient process rather than a fixed entity, we liberate ourselves from suffering. We learn to live with an open heart, embracing each experience as it comes and letting go when it passes. The illusion of self dissolves, and in its place, we find a vast, boundless awareness, an existence not confined by identity, but flowing freely like the river of time. One of the most well-known analogies used in Buddhist teachings to illustrate the illusion of self is the parable of the chariot. A monk once approached the Buddha and asked, "Master, is there such a thing as the self?" Instead of responding with a direct yes or no, the Buddha invited the monk to consider a chariot. If you take apart the chariot, removing its wheels, the axle, the frame, and every other component, the Buddha asked, "Is it still a chariot?" The monk hesitated before answering, "No, it is just a collection of parts." The Buddha then explained, "So it is with the self. It is not a singular, independent entity, but a collection of changing elements." This parable reveals a profound truth. What we call the self is no more than a temporary assembly of physical and mental components. Just as a chariot is not an independent entity but merely a sum of its parts, our sense of self is also a fleeting combination of body, emotions, thoughts, and consciousness. We believe in a continuous identity, yet upon closer inspection, we see that there is no central core, only a fluid, ever-changing process. If we remove each part of the chariot, nothing remains that can be called a chariot. Similarly, if we examine ourselves, peeling away each layer, our body, emotions, memories, and thoughts, what remains? Is there a permanent, unchanging essence? The answer, as the Buddha taught, is no. What we call I is merely a conventional designation for a set of interconnected, impermanent factors. When we begin to see through the illusion of self, we loosen the grip of ego and attachment. Instead of resisting change, we flow with it. We stop defining ourselves by our past mistakes or future ambitions, realizing that each moment offers a new beginning. Without the weight of an artificial self to defend, we experience life with greater ease and lightness. Imagine living without the constant burden of self-concern. No need to prove yourself, no fear of losing face, no pressure to meet rigid expectations. This is the freedom that arises when we transcend the illusion of self. We become more adaptable, open, and compassionate, recognizing that just as we are fluid and ever-changing, so is everyone else. To realize non-self is not to deny our existence but to see it clearly. We continue to function in the world, but without attachment to an illusory I. This shift in understanding does not make us passive or detached, rather, it allows us to engage with life more fully, without fear or resistance. By seeing the self as a transient process rather than a fixed entity, we liberate ourselves from suffering. We learn to live with an open heart, embracing each experience as it comes and letting go when it passes. The illusion of self dissolves, and in its place, we find a vast, boundless awareness, an existence not confined by identity, but flowing freely like the river of time. Attachment is one of the primary sources of suffering in human life. We hold on to things, people, experiences, and even ideas, believing they define our existence or provide us with lasting happiness. However, attachment is built upon illusion, the belief that things are permanent and within our control. In reality, everything is transient, and our clinging only leads to pain when things inevitably change or disappear. At its core, attachment stems from fear, the fear of loss, the fear of uncertainty, and the fear of impermanence. We seek security in relationships, possessions, and status, thinking they will provide stability. However, this security is fleeting. When we base our happiness on external conditions, we become vulnerable to suffering the moment those conditions change. We also attach to our self-image, defending our egos at all costs. We build identities around our achievements, roles, and past experiences, believing that they make us who we are. When someone challenges these identities, we feel threatened, as if our very existence is under attack. But if the self is an illusion, what exactly are we protecting? One of the greatest misconceptions about attachment is the belief in ownership. We say, "This is my house, my car, my success." Yet, in truth, nothing truly belongs to us. The home we live in was once someone else's and will eventually belong to another. The money we accumulate can vanish overnight. Even our bodies, which we so closely identify with, are borrowed from nature and will one day return to the earth. Understanding this illusion allows us to appreciate things without being enslaved by them. We can enjoy relationships without trying to possess others. We can work toward goals without tying our self-worth to the outcome, and we can embrace experiences without the anxiety of clinging to them. When we become attached to something, we set ourselves up for suffering. If we attach to material wealth, we fear losing it. If we cling to relationships, we experience jealousy, insecurity, or grief when they change or end. If we attach to a self-image, we feel crushed when reality contradicts our expectations. For example, imagine holding a rope tightly. If someone pulls it away, the tighter you grip, the more pain you feel. The more attached we are, the more we suffer when things do not go our way. But when we learn to release our grip, we experience relief, freedom, and peace. Letting go does not mean indifference, it means engaging with life fully while understanding its impermanent nature. When we let go of attachment, we still experience love, joy, and success, but we do not become enslaved by them. We enjoy them as they come and accept their departure when it is time. One way to practice detachment is through mindfulness. By observing our thoughts, emotions, and reactions without identifying with them, we create space between ourselves and our impulses. We begin to recognize that everything arises and passes away, just like waves in the ocean. Instead of being tossed around by emotions, we learn to watch them come and go with equanimity. Another method is gratitude. When we appreciate the present moment without the fear of losing it, we cultivate a sense of contentment. Instead of clinging, we learn to cherish things while they last. Just as a traveler enjoys a beautiful view without trying to own the landscape, we can appreciate people and experiences without possessing them. A story, the monkey trap. In many cultures, there is a well-known story about how hunters capture monkeys. They carve a hole in a coconut just big enough for a monkey's hand to slip inside. Then, they place a small piece of food inside. When the monkey reaches in and grabs the food, its fist becomes too large to pull back through the hole. Trapped by its own attachment, the monkey refuses to let go, even when the hunter approaches. The monkey's suffering is self-inflicted. It could be free at any moment if only it released its grip. But its attachment blinds it to the simple solution. We, too, become trapped by our attachments, unable to let go of ideas, desires, and possessions that no longer serve us. The moment we recognize this and release our grip, we find liberation. Breaking free from attachment does not mean renouncing everything. It means engaging with life without being bound by it. It means loving without fear, working without obsession, and experiencing joy without needing to hold on to it. When we let go, we do not lose anything essential. Rather, we gain the ability to move freely, without unnecessary burdens. True freedom is found not in grasping but in allowing life to flow naturally. By embracing change, we open ourselves to infinite possibilities. By letting go, we make room for new growth. And by freeing ourselves from attachment, we step into the boundless peace that has always been within us. The benefits of realizing non-self. Realizing the truth of non-self brings profound transformation to the way we live, perceive, and interact with the world. By transcending the illusion of a fixed self, we free ourselves from the limitations of ego, fear, and suffering. Here are some of the key benefits of understanding and embodying non-self. 1. Liberation from suffering. The majority of our suffering arises from attachment to identity, expectations, and the illusion of permanence. When we no longer cling to a rigid sense of self, we stop taking things personally. We no longer suffer over temporary setbacks, failures, or criticisms because we understand that there is no fixed I to be hurt. 2. Freedom from fear and anxiety. Fear is often rooted in self-preservation, the need to protect our ego, our possessions, and our status. When we let go of the idea of an independent self, we become fearless. We accept change with grace and do not live in constant fear of loss or death. Instead, we live fully in the present, embracing whatever arises. 3. Enhanced relationships. When we are no longer attached to our egos, our relationships become more authentic and compassionate. We stop seeing others as separate from ourselves and begin to understand that we are all interconnected. This realization fosters patience, kindness, and deep empathy, leading to harmonious connections with others. 4. Greater resilience and adaptability. Without a fixed identity to defend, we become more flexible in the face of challenges. We no longer see failures as reflections of who we are but as temporary experiences that pass. This adaptability allows us to face adversity with wisdom rather than resistance. 5. True inner peace. The dissolution of the self brings an unparalleled sense of peace. Without the constant battle of defending, proving, or validating ourselves, we experience a deep tranquility. We are no longer caught up in the endless cycle of desires and aversions, but instead flow effortlessly with life. 6. Living with authenticity. When we abandon the illusion of self, we act not out of ego-driven motives but out of genuine presence. Our actions become guided by wisdom rather than self-interest, allowing us to live with sincerity, integrity, and clarity. Realizing non-self does not make us passive, it makes us truly free. It allows us to live with wisdom, love without attachment, and move through life with effortless ease. When we let go of the false self, we do not lose anything real. Instead, we uncover the boundless, interconnected nature of existence itself. A story: The Man Who Let Go. There was once a man who carried a large, heavy sack wherever he went. The sack was filled with his past regrets, expectations, and desires, things he believed defined him. Over time, the weight of the sack became unbearable, yet he refused to let go, fearing that without it, he would lose his identity. One day, he met a wise monk who observed his struggle and asked, "What is inside your sack?" The man replied, "It holds everything that makes me who I am, my successes, my failures, my dreams, and my fears." The monk smiled and said, "Then tell me, if you were to set it down, would you cease to exist?" The man hesitated, realizing that he had never truly questioned this. Encouraged by the monk, he gently placed the sack on the ground. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of lightness. The burdens he had carried for so long were self-imposed, unnecessary. He walked away, not as someone who had lost himself, but as someone who had finally found freedom. This story teaches us that letting go does not mean losing ourselves, it means releasing the false identities and expectations that weigh us down. Only when we free ourselves from attachment do we truly begin to live. The power of non-self in daily life. When we integrate the wisdom of non-self into our daily lives, we experience profound changes in our perceptions, relationships, and well-being. Without the weight of ego-driven desires, we become more present, compassionate, and accepting of life's natural flow. Greater emotional resilience. By understanding that emotions are fleeting and not intrinsic to our identity, we can observe them without being consumed by them. Anger, jealousy, or sorrow no longer define us, allowing us to respond to situations with wisdom rather than impulse. Improved relationships. Letting go of the rigid concept of self makes us more empathetic and understanding. We no longer cling to expectations of how others should behave or feel entitled to control their actions. This fosters deeper connections built on mutual respect rather than possessiveness. Freedom from the fear of failure. Many of our anxieties stem from a fear of how failure reflects upon us. But when we recognize that the self is not fixed, failure is simply an experience, not an identity. This mindset encourages personal growth and continuous learning. Living with purpose, not ego, without the need to build a self-image based on status, possessions, or validation, we begin to act from genuine intention rather than societal pressure. Our actions become aligned with values that bring true fulfillment rather than superficial success. True inner peace. Non-self removes the internal conflict between who we are and who we think we should be. Free from these contradictions, we live with a sense of harmony, moving through life like a river, fluid, adaptable, and unburdened. The path to realizing non-self. 1. Cultivating mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness is one of the most effective tools in realizing non-self. By observing our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without attachment, we start to see that they arise and pass away like clouds in the sky. Through meditation, we develop a deep awareness of impermanence and the transient nature of the self. Sitting in stillness allows us to witness the ever-changing processes within us, gradually dissolving the illusion of a permanent self. 2. Practicing compassion and selflessness. Acts of selfless service help dissolve the boundaries of the ego. When we extend kindness without expectation of return, we transcend the illusion of separateness. Volunteering, offering help, or simply being present for others teaches us that our happiness is interconnected with the well-being of others. The more we practice compassion, the less we cling to the idea of a fixed, independent self. 3. Reflecting on interdependence. Everything in existence is interconnected. Nothing exists in isolation, everything arises due to conditions and influences beyond itself. Reflecting on this principle of interdependence reveals that the self is not an isolated entity but a fluid process shaped by countless interactions. When we recognize that our thoughts, identities, and emotions are conditioned by external factors, we stop seeing ourselves as separate from the world. 4. Letting go of identity attachments. One of the greatest obstacles to realizing non-self is attachment to identity. We define ourselves by roles, achievements, and personal narratives, reinforcing the illusion of a solid I. By questioning these identifications, am I my job? My reputation? My past? We begin to loosen our grip on a rigid self-concept. The more flexible our identity becomes, the freer we are to adapt, grow, and flow with life's changes. 5. Embracing change in impermanence. Recognizing impermanence as a fundamental truth leads to greater acceptance and inner peace. Instead of resisting change, we learn to embrace it as a natural part of life. When we stop fighting against the inevitable, we move through experiences with grace and ease. This acceptance of impermanence is the key to dissolving the illusion of a fixed self and stepping into the freedom of non-attachment. 6. Seeking wisdom through study and reflection. Studying Buddhist teachings, engaging in philosophical inquiry, and reflecting on personal experiences all deepen our understanding of non-self. The more we explore these truths, the clearer it becomes that the self is not a fixed entity but a dynamic, interdependent process. Conversations with wise teachers, reading spiritual texts, and contemplating personal experiences all contribute to a deeper realization of non-self. By following these practices, we gradually shift our perception from one of separation to one of unity. The path to realizing non-self is not about losing oneself, it is about discovering a deeper, freer way of being, unburdened by the illusions that cause suffering. When we embrace the wisdom of non-self, we step into a world of true liberation. No longer bound by ego, expectations, or the illusion of permanence, we begin to move through life with a sense of ease, lightness, and freedom. To live like a free bird means to soar above attachments, not weighed down by the burdens of identity, control, or fear. 1. The freedom of letting go. Imagine a bird carrying a heavy stone. It struggles to fly, its wings weighed down by the unnecessary burden. The moment it releases the stone, it soars effortlessly into the sky. This is the power of letting go. When we free ourselves from self-imposed limitations, our fears, regrets, and clinging to identity, we discover that we were always meant to fly. 2. Living without fear. Fear often arises from attachment, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. But when we recognize that nothing is truly ours to begin with, that all things are part of a flowing, interconnected reality, fear loses its grip on us. Like a bird trusting the wind beneath its wings, we learn to trust life, embracing its uncertainties rather than resisting them. 3. Loving without attachment. Love, in its purest form, is not about possession but about appreciation. When we love with an understanding of non-self, we do not try to control or hold on to others. Instead, we cherish each moment of connection, knowing that change is inevitable. This form of love is boundless. It is compassion, kindness, and a deep recognition of the shared human experience. 4. Flowing with life. Non-self teaches us to be fluid, adaptable, and open. Life is not something to be controlled but something to be lived. Just as the sky does not resist the passing clouds, we learn to let experiences come and go without clinging or aversion. This allows us to meet each moment with clarity, grace, and acceptance. 5. The ultimate peace. When we dissolve the illusion of self, we find a peace that is unshaken by external circumstances. We are no longer defined by success or failure, praise or criticism. We live fully, love deeply, and experience each moment as it is, free, unburdened, and at peace. The journey to realizing non-self is not about losing who we are but about discovering a truer, lighter way of being. When we let go of what does not serve us, we do not fall, we rise. So live like a free bird, unbound by ego, unattached to fear, and open to the endless sky of existence. In doing so, we find the greatest freedom of all, the ability to live fully, love completely, and let go effortlessly.